Hi everyone, absolutely beautiful Saturday morning here right by the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm taking advantage. This area right here will be jammed with tourists, I can assure you, later today on a Saturday like today. It will be rammed. The River Cafe is like where you take your wife for your 25th wedding anniversary. It's actually a really great restaurant, kind of a little bit silly, but great for that special dinner. Can't get a table on Valentine's night. This bar is one of the best bars in New York. Not many people know about it, but it's outdoors, so it's only during the summer months. It'll keep going until it's too cold. But again, that's one of our favorite spots, and where my famous story about meeting a couple there and chatting to them and eventually going, "Are you famous?" And the guy goes, "Well, she's the #1 tennis player in the world." And she goes, "Well, he's the famous David Lee. He's David Lee, the NBA basketball player." So it turned out I was talking to Caroline Wozniacki and her husband right here in this bar. And then they asked me to take a photo of them that looks like this, which I did. And it got like 300,000 likes on Instagram. So that's like my social media moment. Of course, it was posted on David Lee's account and Caroline Wozniacki's and had no mention of me, which is just the way I like it. Okay, well, sorry it's been a bit late coming, this one. September's such a quick month, and next thing you know, September's got a week to go. It's always fast at this time of year as we come back from Labor Day. And sure enough, everybody got really negative oil. The speculators took net positioning to net short, which really hasn't happened in the history of the data. There's a structural long in oil from things like ETFs and other people that are structurally holding. So for the market to be net short is something we haven't seen, and it didn't take Steve Cohen to tell you that if everyone's max short, then the market's probably going to bounce. And sure enough, crude has bounced, but nothing is improving about these balances, I'm afraid to say. Libya's not capitalizable, if that's a word. And the reality remains that while OPEC is umming and ahhing about whether to bring the volumes back into the market, which just can't take it, the outlook for next year remains for very strong non-OPEC growth, and demand estimates keep weakening. So now we're sort of struggling towards maybe a million as the over-under on demand growth for next year, where the market was at 1.5 million not that long ago. And as you all know, there's an issue with China, which is supremely unpredictable. They will try and jam stimulus through, they will try and get the economy going, but it really feels like they're pushing on a string. I also saw an interesting chart whereby China's wealth, far more than any other major economy, is tied up in property. Sort of 60% of the net worth of the average Chinese, off the top of my head, which is, triple what it is in the US. And of course, if the property market's really struggling, then Chinese consumers will turn very conservative, and what they do is they buy gold. So, especially as they can't buy Bitcoin. So gold is looking great, and I had a really terrific conversation with Barrick Gold IR Cleve yesterday, and we're kind of getting excited about Barrick Gold in terms of looking harder into the whole gold mining sector, which has a, let's face it, bad reputation. One of the interesting things about the gold mining sector is the emergence of ETFs actually took a lot of multiple out of the gold miners, because portfolio managers could then avoid the middleman, who was a dodgy middleman, namely a coal mining company that couldn't run its operations and kept doing stupid things, and just buy gold directly, and that took a lot of multiple out of the gold stocks. But I do think Barrick is on the path to multiple expansion, although they have a big capex line up here of copper capex actually over the next 3 years, which is not going to please Wall Street, and probably explains why it looks cheaper than a couple of the other ones, such as Newmont. There's only a couple of other ones, and one of them is Newmont. Anyway, gold, Chinese property, that all is exciting to us, whereas oil is not. Had a top Washington lobbyist on our call this week, and she, is really, really superb. Particularly, we know her through the whole subject of renewable fuel standards. But generally speaking, we were talking about the election, and it was, she's a brilliant lobbyist, Tara Billingsley, but, that there's so much, it's such a coin toss essentially right now, the election, that it's hard to make firm statements about what's going on. A couple of the interesting things she said, that there is a pursuit of a hurry-up transmission bill on both sides of the House before this Congress ends, led by Joe Manchin. If they can pull that off, we'll see. They'll still face local opposition to building transmission, but they're going to make it easier from a regulatory point of view. And I think that's the one last bipartisan energy agenda within Washington. So what we saw over the past 15 years is that having previously had a fairly bipartisan approach to energy in the US, which was essentially energy independence, which gave you the Energy Independence Act of 2007, the emergence of this enormous US oil and gas domestic industry completely reversing our trade flows has essentially made energy more bipartisan, because you're not going to get many Democrats in oil and gas states. In fact, the example given was that when the revolution started with Bakken Shale, both North Dakota senators were actually Democrats, and now Tara was saying it'd be very hard for a Democrat to win North Dakota. Will there be massive reversals? Well, one thing that was agreed is Kamala doesn't really have a great energy agenda. As you know, she's kind of on the record saying she wants to ban fracking, and then on the record saying actually she doesn't. But what's been said is, and you know, you can't unwind another interesting point that's blatantly obvious, quite frankly, but worth reminding yourselves, is you can't separate climate from energy, and certainly not in the Democrat agenda. And so initially Kamala was kind of working towards, for example, the climate committee as a senator, but actually is much more interested in judicial issues as a former attorney general, and therefore has essentially resigned from that committee in order to, one of the things that was highlighted, go after Brett Kavanaugh when he was up for a Supreme Court nomination, because that's really where Kamala's passions lie. So there isn't a huge energy agenda there at all to speak of. And then on the other side, of course, with Donald, the whole drill baby drill thing is almost in the realms of the famous "we're going to cut oil and gas subsidies," which everybody always says in Washington. You know, Elizabeth Warren, my favorite, will be up there heroically saying we're going to slash oil and gas subsidies, which again, as so many of these people do when they make statements like this, just shows you how little they know about oil and gas, because there really are no subsidies in oil and gas. The one subsidy there is that the Democrats won't touch is the US gasoline price is far too low for the environmental impact that low gasoline prices have on the US. But of course, neither side, and this is the other, I should have said, this is the other bipartisan issue in Washington, is both sides believe that you have to have the lowest gasoline prices possible, because otherwise you're going to get voted out of power. And it was interesting that the Democrats attacked the gasoline price very strongly approaching the midterms, because we were approaching the midterms this past cycle. And of course, the Democrats did a tremendous job of getting the gasoline price down, because they slammed 1 million barrels a day of SPR crude into the Gulf Coast, and that did what it should do. It's a lot of oil, even if a lot of it was exported to China, which was super absurd in terms of, you know, what they were trying to achieve in terms of energy security, which is the original bipartisan issue. And so, yeah, you got the gasoline price down, and the environmental agenda at that point takes second place. And that will be the structure of Washington politics forevermore. So the potential to address the single biggest element of the US fossil fuel consumption balance, which is essentially US cars and vehicles, depending on how you look at power, which of course is becoming lower emission over time as we take out a lot of coal and put in a lot of natural gas. And of course, everyone's now excited about this nuclear deal that Microsoft has signed. One thing I'm just slightly interested in is that Microsoft is doing an offset with that nuclear plant. I was wondering whether it was a microgrid situation, where I think the next phase will be, you'll see the dedicated data centers with power plants adjacent on a microgrid. And this is what I think, for example, Mark Zuckerberg was talking about, building a 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant in a place where presumably absolutely nobody lives, remembering that you have to have a ton of water to run a nuke plant. That's an issue. You can't put one in the desert, really. But then you'll microgrid it into a dedicated data center. My personal experience right now of AI is I'm shaking my head. I just find it, yeah, it can summarize stuff and whatever. I guess I'm also upset because potentially it puts me out of a job. But when I talk about AI on Wall Street, I always say, I'll tell you what happened. It just happened. You know, all these research departments, all these traders, all the sales traders. There used to be a job on Wall Street. People make $1 million a year as a sales trader, which was between a salesman and a trader. They're all gone. There's none of them left. It's all done by computers today. And to me, that is the AI revolution already well in evidence by just the lack of numbers on Wall Street. All those buildings behind me, all the offices are at best 40% on average occupied, and that's depending on if people are actually working at the office. That's to say they're 40% leased, but you don't have 5 days a week people turning up to work, although everyone's excited that Amazon is now requiring everyone back at work. I gotta say, I work at home all the time and I really miss the office. I used to love chatting to the sales traders, and that was a huge, that was what was so much fun about Wall Street, was the trading floor, right? That's what excited me as an analyst as much as anything. Trading floors don't really exist anymore. I mean, they do exist, but the scale of the trading floors we used to have and the number of them, it must be down 90%, really, in all seriousness. Okay, where do we go from here? Well, told you so, the dreaded, if you remember, we were highlighting the IPPs, Constellation, CEG was one of the names, Vistra. Those guys had a great Friday on the Microsoft news. It was also fascinating, and I highlighted on Twitter Jamie Hurd talking about how natural gas went up a lot on the Microsoft nuke news, which is correct, which is essentially that the implied price that Microsoft is paying for the power, which is decent, $100 I think a megawatt is what people are talking about long term, is a very high price, and therefore the outlook for the US power sector is really bid by this Microsoft bid, because there's more to come and these guys are clearly prepared to pay. All right, I'm going on too long. I'll actually do another one, I think, on Monday, just to kind of catch up, because this is my effort for Monday and it's already Saturday, if that makes any sense. Have a great weekend. Oh wait, let me show you Athena. Athena. Wait, where are you? Good girl.